Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 843, and today is October 6th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot to talk about on today's show, big stories to discuss. First, want to mention the sponsor of today's show, and that is the Expat Money Summit 2025. This upcoming week, it starts on the 10th, runs through the 12th. Mikhail Thorpe is putting on the Expat Money Summit 2025. And guess what? You could get a ticket to the event for free just by going to expatmoneysummit.com and claiming your free ticket. If you get a ticket to the event, you're going to learn a lot of great stuff about moving yourself, your assets abroad, saving a little bit on taxes, where to buy property, where to get a second passport, crafting your perfect plan B. And there's going to be a focus on Latin America, South America in this year's summit. So definitely worth checking out. And again, you do that for free just with your free ticket. Now, let's say you can't see the stuff this weekend, or you want some of the access to the exclusive VIP panels. You could get a VIP ticket for the event by using the promo code Kyle when you check out at expatmoneysummit.com. Additionally, I will be on one of the VIP panels along with Dave DeCamp. We're actually set to record that later today, so by the next episode of the show, I could just tell you how great it is and how much you should want a VIP ticket. Now, let's get into today's articles. As always, just want to mention at the start that I talk about a lot of articles that I write at different websites, the Libertarian Institute, JudgeNap.com, and antiwar.com. Best place to follow all my work is on my Twitter handle at @KyleAnzalone_. Conflicts of interest, the Kyle Anzalone Show, all the articles I write get published there. Let's do it. First article up here today is one I wrote for the Institute on October 2nd. Trump says the U.S. is in armed conflict with Latin American drug cartels. The White House provided a memo informing Congress that President Donald Trump determined the U.S. is in a non-international armed conflict with Latin American cartels. The U.S. attacked at least 3, now 4 ships in the Caribbean last month, alleging that vessels were operated by cartels. So this is a quote from the memo. Based on these cumulative effects of the hostile acts against citizens and interests of the United States and friendly foreign nations, the president determined that the United States is in a non-international armed conflict with these designated terrorist organizations. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has designated about a dozen Latin American cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. President Donald Trump authorized the Department of War to take military action against the designated cartels in international waters and on foreign soil. While Congress has not declared war or given Trump the authorization to start an armed conflict with the cartels, the U.S. has attacked 3 boats in the Caribbean that departed Venezuela. The U.S. claims that the 17 people killed in those strikes were members of narco-terrorist cartels. Jeffrey C. Korn, a retired judge, advocate, general lawyer who was formerly the Army's senior advisor for law of war issues, told the New York Times that the Trump administration lacked authorization to wage war against the cartels. He said, "This is not stretching the envelope, this is shredding it and tearing it apart." The memo, first published by the Times on Thursday, said the Department of War was only targeting non-state armed groups. However, Trump and Rubio have claimed that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is the leader of a designated cartel, and the State Department is offering a $50 million bounty on Maduro. The Times reported on Monday that Rubio was pushing for a regime change in Venezuela. Caracas said on Thursday that 5 U.S. warplanes flew near the country's shores. And so there's certainly a lot of threats and intimidation and targeting of Venezuela going on in the White House. And I do think this is going to escalate into at least direct attacks in Venezuela, if not an outright conflict. Next up here, Headset says 4 narco-terrorists killed in latest U.S. attacks on Venezuela boat. And so this one's from Jason Ditz, October 3rd, antiwar.com. A day after President Trump informed Congress that the U.S. is in a non-international armed conflict with drug cartels, the U.S. carried out another strike on a Venezuelan boat in the Caribbean Sea, alleging it was loaded with drugs. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth announced the strike on social media, claiming the attack on the small boat killed 4 narco-terrorists. President Donald Trump went on to claim, without evidence, that the boat was loaded with enough drugs to kill 25,000 to 50,000 people and was entering American territory. In reality, the boat was off the coast of Venezuela, far from U.S. territorial waters. Hegseth further claimed that the U.S. had intelligence that the 4 were affiliated with designated terrorist organizations, but did not specify or show evidence, as has happened time and time again. So this is the U.S. just waging an outright undeclared war under our so-called peace president. Now, next up here, moving on to Ukraine stories. This first one I wrote for the Institute on October 2nd. Ukraine promotes neo-Nazi to brigadier general. Ukrainian President Zelensky promoted Colonel Andrei Belitsky to the rank of brigadier general. Belitsky has said the purpose of the Ukrainian right is to fight the Semitic-led Untermenschen, or subhumans. So, this is the statement from the Ukrainian government to confer the military rank of brigadier general on Colonel Belitsky, commander of the 3rd Army Corps of the East Operational Command of the Ground Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Belitsky is the commander of the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade and the founder of the Azov Regiment. I do believe they've reorganized the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade into the 3rd Army Corps, but I believe it's just basically the Azov Regiment. He is an outright white supremacist who has said, Ukrainians are a part and one of the largest and highest quality of the European white race. Ross, creator of the great civilization, the highest human achievements, the historical mission of our nation in this turning point to lead the white peoples of the whole world into the last crusade for the existence against the Semitic-led Untermenschen. So that is from a speech Belitsky gave in 2017. And while they're, kind of like Jelani, oh, this guy's reformed, he's not a neo-Nazi anymore, the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade webpage says it maintains the same principles on which the legendary Azov and the entire Azov movement are the foundation, worldview principles of the Azovian units are Ukrainian centrism, traditionalism, hierarchy, and responsibility. So once again, you hear like that social nationalist or national socialist rhetoric from the website, the webpage, the current webpage of Belitsky's military group. So additionally, Zelensky awarded the Hero of Ukraine to Andrei Parubi, who was recently killed. Parubi was assassinated in August. In 1991, he founded the Social Nationalist Party of Ukraine that uses the Nazi wolf's angle as its logo, and the Nazi symbolism, the Social Nationalist, the National Socialist Party of Ukraine, right? Like, this is all intentionally rooted in Nazi ideology and rhetoric. So neo-Nazis like Belitsky and Parubi gained power in Ukraine following the U.S.-backed coup in 2014. Following the ouster of President Viktor Yanukovych, Parubi rose to the position of Speaker of the Parliament, and Belitsky founded the Azov Battalion. So, we could see how the U.S. kind of dreads the line from our intervention in Ukraine to the empowering of the neo-Nazis. Next up here, U.S. to provide Ukraine with intelligence for long-range missile strikes inside of Russia. The U.S. will provide Ukraine with intelligence to carry out long-range missile strikes to target energy infrastructure inside Russia, the Wall Street Journal reported on Wednesday. The report said that President Trump recently signed off on the Pentagon for providing such support for Ukraine, and said that it's the first time the Trump administration will aid such Ukrainian strikes deep inside Russia, which always risks major escalation from Moscow. The report said that while the U.S. has long backed Ukrainian drone and missile strikes, the intelligence sharing means that Ukraine will be better able to hit refineries, pipelines, power stations, and other infrastructure far from its borders. Last year, the Biden administration backed Ukrainian strikes inside Russia using U.S.-provided ATACMS missiles, which have a range of up to 190 miles. In response, Russia altered its nuclear doctrine and lowered the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. The news of Trump backing the long-range strikes comes as the administration is considering arming Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles, which have a range of over 1,500 miles. Though it's unclear if providing Ukraine with launchers for the Tomahawks is realistic, and a source told Reuters that the transfer of missiles is unlikely. The Wall Street Journal report said that the Trump administration is also considering arming Ukraine with Barracudas, an air-launched missile provided by Anzalone, and other munitions that have a range of about 500 miles. Providing such weapons would mark a significant escalation in the proxy war. And so, again, this is what we warned about with Trump, is that he didn't have what it took to actually get a deal done in Ukraine. He didn't have the mental fortitude. He didn't have an understanding of the conflict that was all very necessary to actually ending the war in Ukraine. And so now the United States is in a position where Trump hasn't reached an end to the war in Ukraine, and Ukraine is struggling. And so he has two options here: to give Zelensky one final message to let him know that he is about to lose this war, that there is no magic pill coming from the United States to turn things around, and to make a deal with Putin now before it's too late to get any deal and Ukraine loses so much, or for him to ramp up support for Ukraine and hoping to prolong this war as long as possible to continue to bleed Russia, basically just continuing down the same road as we had with Joe Biden. And I thought that was the most likely scenario, and it does seem that that's what's playing out. Next up here, this one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, October 5th. Putin says supplying Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles could ruin U.S.-Russian relations. So Russian President Vladimir Putin warned on Sunday that if the U.S. decides to arm Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles, it could ruin the relationship between Washington and Moscow. This will ruin our relations, or at least the emerging positive trend in these relations, Putin said. Vice President J.D. Vance recently confirmed the Trump administration was considering arming Ukraine with Tomahawks, a step that would mark a significant escalation of the proxy war since the missiles can fire at distances of over 1,500 miles, putting Moscow well in range. It's unclear if arming Ukraine with Tomahawks is a realistic option for the U.S., since the missiles are designed to be fired out of U.S. warships. Only in recent years has the U.S. developed a ground-launched mobile version of the Tomahawk launcher. Such weapon systems were prohibited by the INF Treaty, which the U.S. withdrew from in 2019. The Wall Street Journal reported last week that the U.S. was considering arming Ukraine with other types of missiles that have a range of around 500 miles, including Barracudas. The report also said that Trump has signed off on the Pentagon providing Ukraine with intelligence for long-range missile strikes inside of Russia. In August, the administration announced a weapons deal for Ukraine that will provide the country with extended range attack munitions, or ERAMs, which are air-launched missiles that can hit targets 280 miles away. It's unclear when the missiles will arrive, but once they do, they will be the longest-range weapons the U.S. has provided to Ukraine so far. Last year, the Biden administration backed Ukrainian strikes inside Russia using U.S.-provided ATACMS missiles, which have a range of up to 190 miles. The Journal previously reported the Trump administration stopped allowing Ukrainian ATACMS strikes on Russia, but that is poised to change now that the president has signed off on backing strikes inside of Russia. Next up here, this one I wrote for JudgeNap.com on October 2nd. Taiwan imported $1.3 billion in Russian oil product during the first half of 2025. As the U.S. tries to isolate Russia and crush its economy, many allies continue to import Russian energy. A new report reveals that Taiwan imported 1.3 billion worth of Russian oil over 6 months. So this is from the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. Average monthly imports of Russian fossil fuel derivatives naphtha spiked nearly sixfold between the average of 2022 and the first 6 months of 2025. In the first half of 2025, Taiwan imported naphtha worth nearly 1.3 billion and became the world's second largest importer. Naphtha is a flammable liquid hydrocarbon mixture produced from refined crude oil or natural gas. Taipei imports most of it from a sanctioned Russian energy firm. The report said that Taiwan's imports of Russian energy have generated 1.7 billion in tax revenue for Moscow. I'm assuming that's since 2022. President Donald Trump has tightened the economic war launched against Russia by Joe Biden following the invasion of Ukraine. The president has recently criticized European nations for continuing to import Russian energy. Last month, Trump demanded that Europe end oil and gas imports from Russia. They have to immediately cease all energy imports from Russia, he said. Otherwise, we're all wasting a lot of time. In 2024, Europe imported about 42 billion in goods from Russia. The U.S. imported about 3 billion in Russian products last year. Russia remains the largest supplier of enriched nuclear fuel to the United States. And so it's been much harder to break and completely isolate from the Western economic orbit than I believe the Biden administration nearly thought, as we're 3 years into this conflict, and there's still a significant and at times increasing amounts of Russian energy purchases from Washington's allies. It's important to note that Taipei gets an awful lot of military aid and gets weapons from the United States, and we are that country's most important backer. Next up here, moving on to the Korean Peninsula, Kim warns U.S. launching military buildup in South Korea aimed at launching preemptive war. So, North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un warned that the United States military buildup in South Korea is aimed at establishing the ability to launch a preemptive war. Kim threatened Pyongyang would develop countermeasures to maintain the balance of power. During a address to the Defense Development 2025 Expo, Kim said, the U.S. Republic of Korea, which is South Korea, nuclear alliance is making rapid progress, and they are conducting various kinds of exercises to execute dangerous scenarios according to the so-called nuclear operations guidelines and to get them to adopt them. Recently, the United States is taking measures for expanding the stockpile of its military assets in and around South Korea, posing a real and serious threat to the security of our country and others in the region. No one can deny or conceal the fact that the United States arms buildup schemes are mainly geared at making it easier to launch preemptive strikes against the other side in times of emergency. Recently, the U.S. has created a second super squadron of fighter jets on the Korean Peninsula and reestablished a military intelligence unit near the DMZ. Additionally, the U.S. recently concluded trilateral war games with Japan and South Korea that included preparing to conduct nuclear strikes. Kim vowed that North Korea would take steps to maintain the balance of power in the region. He did not provide details, but suggested North Korea would target South Korea with its nuclear weapons. So he said, if the United States persists in the dangerous moves by reinforcing its military strength in blatant disregard of the security concerns of the state in the region, the developments will spur us more powerfully to implement the relevant military and technological measures aimed at removing the new threats and maintaining the balance of power. While there has been an American military buildup on the Korean Peninsula and Pyongyang has responded with fiery rhetoric, Kim and President Donald Trump have both expressed a willingness to meet. So hopefully we will see another meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump sometime this winter, maybe next spring. The longer we go without the meeting, I think the harder it may be to actually see that come to fruition. All right, next up here, this one I wrote on October 2nd for antiwar.com. Israel kills Doctors Without Borders staffer in Gaza. Doctors Without Borders condemned Israel for killing an occupational therapist in Gaza. Israel has killed over 1,500 medical personnel in Gaza, including 14 Doctors Without Borders staffers. So the statement from Doctors Without Borders, or Medical Sans Frontières, which is the initial French name of the organization, so it uses the acronym MSF. An attack carried out by the Israeli forces in Gaza killed Doctors Without Borders, Medical Sans Frontières, occupational therapist Omar Hayek, and seriously injured 4 other people. The attack took place on a street where our teams were waiting to take a bus to the MSF field hospital in Deir al-Balah. All staff were wearing MSF vests, clearly identifying themselves as medical humanitarian workers. Multiple healthcare workers, MSF family members, and MSF staff were also seriously injured in the attack this morning, including a physiotherapist, occupational surgeon, supply officer, and finance assistants. One of our staff members is in critical condition with shrapnel wounds. Israel has frequently attacked hospitals and medical facilities across Gaza, leaving millions of Palestinians in the Strip with only one fully functioning hospital. UN experts have deemed Israel's onslaught in Gaza as a medicide or intentional destruction of the healthcare system. The World Health Organization found Israel has conducted over 700 attacks on healthcare facilities. The WHO has counted 1,580 doctors, nurses, and other medical professionals who have been killed over the past 2 years. MSF said the attack on Hayek is part of the years-long pattern of targeting healthcare. The organization went on to say Israel is conducting a genocide in Gaza and called for a ceasefire. In addition to wounding thousands of healthcare professionals, Israel has arrested Palestinian doctors attempting to provide care. Dr. Hassam Abu Saifa was the director of the Kamal Adwan Hospital until Israel put the facility under siege. Israel arrested the doctor, and he has been held in detention since December of 2024. A rights group that was able to meet with Dr. Saifa in prison last month reported his health is declining and he is suffering from multiple untreated ailments. MSF said one of its surgeons, Dr. Mohammed Abid, is being held in Israeli detention without charges. All right, so let's next do the stories on the flotilla. So I think I got 3 here on this. First one I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on October 5th. Ben-Gvir says he's proud Israel is treating flotilla activists as terrorist supporters. So, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir touted Israel's mistreatment of activists who were aboard the flotilla that was attempting to bring food and baby formula to the starving people of Gaza. Allegations have been made that Israel is abused Swedish activist Gerda Thunberg. So, Ben-Gvir stated that he visited the facility where the flotilla activists were detained. Many of the ships were attempting to break the Israeli blockade of Gaza were intercepted in international waters. During his trip to the Kanzois prison, Ben-Gvir was filmed taunting the detained activists. National Security Minister Ben-Gvir said he was proud Israel was putting the activists in the same condition as terrorists. He said, I visited the prison and I was proud that we were treating the flotilla activists as terrorist supporters. Whoever supports terrorism is a terrorist and deserves the condition of terrorist. It is worthwhile for them to experience the conditions in the prison and think twice before they come to Israel again. That's how it works. Over 400 activists who were traveling on about 50 ships were taken captive by Israel. One of the released flotilla members claims Israel violently abused Thunberg. Turkish activists claimed Thunberg was physically abused. They dragged little Greta Thunberg by her hair before our eyes, beat her, and forced her to kiss the Israeli flag. They did everything imaginable to her as a warning to others. A Swedish foreign ministry official said they received reports from released activists that Thunberg was forced to hold an Israeli flag while pictures were taken. And then Italian journalist Stervino Tomasi, a released participant in the flotilla, said, "We also saw Greta Thunberg at the port, in that case with her arms tied and an Israeli flag next to her, just as mockery. Let's say the mockery was part of a verbal and psychological violence they always carry out in order to demean, ridicule, and laugh in situations where there is nothing to laugh about." Tel Aviv responded to the allegations, claiming they were brazen lies, although that's a little bit hard to believe if Ben-Gvir says that they are being treated as terrorists. All right, second story on the flotilla is one I wrote for JudgeNap.com last week. Colombia ends trade agreement with Israel over arrest of flotilla activists. So Colombia announces had terminated its free trade agreement with Israel and expelled Israeli diplomats in response to the IDF preventing the global smooth flotilla from delivering food to Gaza. On Wednesday, the IDF began intercepting vessels in the flotilla and arresting the activists, lawmakers, and journalists on the ships. The flotilla was attempting to break the Israeli blockade of Gaza and bring food to the starving Palestinians. Two Colombian citizens were arrested. And then this is the statement posted by the Colombian Foreign Ministry. Colombia condemns in the strongest possible terms the kidnapping in international waters by the Israeli armed forces in full violation of international law and the Geneva Accords of the Colombian citizens Luna Barreto and Mandula Bedolla. So those are the two arrested. Bogota denounced the interceptions as a crime and moved to cut ties with Tel Aviv. So this is a statement from the Colombian President Petro's office. The head of state warned that this constitutes yet another international crime committed by Benjamin Netanyahu's government. In light of the situation, decisions were made to protect all Colombia's citizens and strengthen national sovereignty and condemn violations of human rights. So one place where this is kind of interesting is Colombia is one of the United States' closest partners in South America. Joe Biden, did a lot of work, invested a lot of American taxpayer money in building Colombia a military and making Colombia a major non-NATO U.S. ally. And this stretches back even to his time as vice president. This isn't even, and in the Senate, this isn't even just his presidency. This is a long-term project of Joe Biden, not just the demented old president. And so I wonder how this kind of impacts Colombia's place as one of the main U.S. Allies in South America, and especially as we're ramping up towards war with Venezuela, what that would mean potentially for the U.S. using Colombia as a base of operations to potentially attack its neighbor. All right, the last flotilla story I have is from Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com, October 5th. Report: Netanyahu ordered drone attack on Gaza aid flotilla boats in Tunisia. So the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu directly ordered the attacks on the global smooth flotilla that were carried out in early September while other boats were moored in Tunisia. CBS News reported on Friday a total of two boats were hit in two attacks that were conducted in September 8th and 9th. Two intelligence officials told CBS News that Israeli forces fired the drones from a submarine that dropped incendiary devices and caused fire. The report noted that under international law, the use of incendiary devices against civilian populations or civilian targets is prohibited. The attacks targeted the Family, a Portuguese flag vessel, and the Alma, a British flag vessel. In both cases, the crew were able to extinguish the fire and the attacks caused no casualties. But again, just to show how brazen Israel is acting here. So we had a major story on Friday. I wrote this article at antiwar.com. Hamas agrees to release hostages. Trump calls on Israel to stop the bombing. So Hamas responded to Donald Trump's 20-point peace proposal to end the Israeli genocide in Gaza. Hamas said it is willing to release all Israeli captives, turn administration in Gaza over to an independent Palestinian committee, and enter into negotiations aimed at ending the conflict. In a statement released on Friday, Hamas says it's willing to release the remaining 48 Israeli captives under the framework proposed by Donald Trump. So the statement said, out of concern to stop the aggression and genocide being inflicted upon our steadfast peoples in the Gaza Strip, the movement announces its approval to release all prisoners of the occupation, according to the exchange formula included in President Donald Trump's proposal. On Monday, this is last Monday, Trump met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House and released a 20-point proposal to end the war in Gaza. The deal would involve an immediate ceasefire followed by Hamas releasing all remaining Israeli captives. Once that happens, Israel will release 250 life-sentenced Palestinians plus 1,700 Palestinians thrown in Israeli prisons after October 7, 2023. Trump's proposal includes turning Gaza over to the control of apolitical Palestinians. That will be overseen by an international board of peace that will include Trump as chair and former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. Hamas has said it is prepared to immediately enter into negotiations through mediators to discuss the details. Control of Gaza following the Israeli withdrawal may be a potential issue in reaching a final agreement. Hamas said the movement also reiterates its approval to hand over the administration of the Gaza Strip to a Palestinian body composed of independent technocrats. While Trump said that Netanyahu had agreed to his proposal, it's unclear whether Israel will be willing to implement the deal. The agreement calls for a phased Israeli withdrawal from Gaza and the possibility of the Palestinian Authority taking over as the government in the Strip. Netanyahu previously rejected the idea of the PA having any role in post-war Gaza. Additionally, after Trump announced the proposal, Netanyahu said, now the whole world, including the Arab and Muslim world, is pressuring Hamas to accept the terms that we created together with Trump to bring back all the hostages living and dead while the IDF stays in the Strip. And so he is basically saying that Israel is not going to comply with the withdrawal portion of that agreement. And so, that's concerning. Now, after Hamas put out that statement, Trump made it clear that he viewed that as Hamas accepting his terms and called on Israel to end the bombing of Gaza, which Israel had not done. Now, an update on this. This is October 5th, antiwar.com. Report, Trump lashes out at Netanyahu during call about Gaza ceasefire deal. Axios reports that President Donald Trump told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during a call, "You're always so effing negative." The leaders were discussing Trump's proposed ceasefire and hostage exchange, which Hamas had accepted. After Hamas agreed to release all remaining Israeli hostages and enter into negotiations to end the onslaught, Trump called Netanyahu. According to Axios, a U.S. official explained that Netanyahu told Trump, "This is nothing to celebrate and it doesn't mean anything." The source said Trump responded, "I don't know why you're always so effing negative. This is a win. Take it." While the leads to the press have said that Trump is frustrated with Netanyahu, the president has not threatened to leverage U.S. military support for Israel. Without Washington support, Israel would be unable to wage war in Gaza or across the Middle East. Netanyahu has sabotaged multiple efforts by Trump to reach agreements that would de-escalate the crises across the Middle East. In March, Israel broke a deal brokered by Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff that would have ended the genocide in Gaza. Then, in June, Israel launched an unprovoked war against Iran on the eve of U.S. and Iranian negotiations. Ultimately, Netanyahu was able to draw Trump into the war, derailing the talks with Tehran. And then last month, Netanyahu attempted to assassinate Hamas leadership in Qatar as the officials were meeting to discuss a peace proposal from Trump. The strikes failed to kill the targets, but did significant damage to Washington's relationship with Doha. After Hamas accepted Trump's proposal last week, the president called on Tel Aviv to halt attacks in Gaza. However, Israeli strikes have continued. The Gaza Health Ministry reported on Sunday that Israeli strikes had killed, at the time I wrote this article, 19 Palestinians. I later saw an update that number was in the 60s. All right, everyone. Last article here today, if I could get it to load. Netanyahu says he will not begin implementing Trump's deal until all hostages are returned to Israel, published at judgenap.com on the 5th. So Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is potentially inserting a poison pill into negotiations with Hamas, as he is refusing to halt military operations in Gaza until all Israeli hostages are freed. Hamas says it needs Israel to stop attacks to facilitate the release of the captives. Netanyahu said on Sunday that no part of President Donald Trump's peace proposal will be implemented until all hostages are released. He added that if Hamas does not release all hostages by Trump's deadline, Israel will resume fighting with full backing of all countries involved. It's unclear what deadline Netanyahu is referencing. On Friday, Trump gave Netanyahu a 72-hour deadline to accept a 20-point peace process he announced last week alongside Netanyahu in the White House. On Friday, Hamas responded by agreeing to release all the Israeli captives and enter into negotiations. Trump accepted Hamas's statement as agreeing to his deal. He called for the rapid release of the hostages and for Israel to halt attacks inside of Gaza. Hamas has said it will take several days to release the captives and called on Israel to pause the assault to facilitate the release. A Palestinian source close to Hamas told Al Arabiya that Israel was undermining Trump's proposal by continuing attacks. They said the ceasefire was essential to being able to recover the bodies of the deceased Israeli captives. I'm sure for Hamas, logistically, it probably takes a little bit of time. I believe I've heard they use couriers. Given the fact that Israel was able to broadcast Netanyahu's speech to all the cell phones in Gaza and the pager attacks that happened in Lebanon, my guess is that there are little to no electronic devices anywhere near the Palestinian members of Hamas that are holding the Israeli captives. And so they probably have, to have a message run to a person, and I'm guessing there's multiple intermediaries that people don't, it's not as simple as, oh, you go knock on your neighbor's door, they knock on a door in the next town over, somebody knocks on a door the next street over, and there you go, you got the message to the person you need to. My guess is this takes quite a bit of time, probably a few days, just to coordinate the release of the captives, and that's without the Israeli airstrikes going on. The Hamas source, or the Palestinian source close to Hamas, did say that Trump has shown flexibility on giving Hamas time to recover the bodies, which would suggest that Trump is willing to take a somewhat reasonable stance on this. But if the Israeli strikes don't stop, then I think it's going to be hard to implement the deal for a couple of reasons. One being, that'll just be hard for Hamas to recover the bodies. But I think the second prong to that will be that Hamas may be less likely to want to take the deal if they're constantly being pounded with American strikes. All right, everybody, that's where I will wrap up the show for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. New episode of the Kyle Anzalone Show coming up later today. Don't miss it.